Donald Trump's leadership has been disastrous for Indigenous people. His presidency and policies have been widely criticized for their negative impact on Indigenous peoples. Trump's administration rolled back numerous environmental protections, many of which directly impacted Indigenous lands. For instance, the reduction of the Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante National Monuments in Utah by about 85 and nearly 50% respectively opened these lands up to mining and drilling, threatening sacred sites and the environment. Trump's support for pipeline projects like the Dakota Access Pipeline and Keystone XL posed significant threats to Indigenous lands and waterways. Despite widespread protests by the Standing Rock Sioux and other Indigenous tribes, Trump signed executive orders to advance these projects, prioritizing corporate interests over Indigenous sovereignty and environmental health. Trump's policies often disregard tribal sovereignty. The administration attempted to terminate the Wampanoag tribe's reservation status, undermining their self-governance and land rights. Such actions eroded trust and cooperation between the government and tribal nations. Trump's efforts to repeal the Affordable Care Act threatened healthcare access for many Indigenous people who rely on ACA provisions. Furthermore, his proposed budget cuts directly affected the Indian Health Service. They would have severely impacted health services for Native communities, exacerbating already significant health disparities. Trump's rhetoric often displayed cultural insensitivity and perpetuated harmful stereotypes about Indigenous people. He frequently used the term Pocahontas as a slur against Senator Elizabeth Warren. This is widely condemned. It's racist. It's disrespectful to Native American heritage. Trump's economic policies, like the tax cuts favoring the wealthy, often did little to address the systemic poverty and unemployment issues facing many Indigenous communities. The focus on deregulation and resource extraction tended to benefit large corporations at the expense of local and tribal economies. The Trump administration's response to COVID was criticized for failing to adequately support Indigenous communities who were disproportionately affected by the virus. Issues like delayed distribution of relief funds and insufficient resources for health care and infrastructure in tribal areas were particularly important. Finally, Trump's policies and budget proposals did not adequately address the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Although he signed an executive order to establish a task force on the issue, it was completely lacking in the necessary funding and resources to be effective, and his overall administration failed to prioritize this crisis adequately. You could see what Donald Trump did as part of a long history of disrespect and exploitation by white men in positions of power in the U.S. From the arrival of European settlers, Indigenous lands were systematically seized through treaties often made under duress, broken promises, and outright force. The doctrine of discovery and the concept of manifest destiny were used to justify the expansion into and expropriation of native lands. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, signed by President Andrew Jackson, led to the forced relocation of thousands of Native Americans from their ancestral homelands to the designated Indian Territory, now the state of Oklahoma. The Trail of Tears resulted in the deaths of thousands due to harsh conditions during the forced marches. So it's nothing new from Trump. White men are screwing over Indigenous people, and another Trump presidency would be disastrous for Indigenous communities.